Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Security webinar series entitled Cybersecurity Insights for CISOs, looking back at 2021 and at future trends for the coming year. My name is Sasha Famak. I'm the Corporate Communications Strategist here at Security. Deal with all things that are connected to cyber and awareness and everything to do with that around the world. So I'm delighted that you're here joining us today for this informative webinar, and it'll probably take around 20-25 minutes here today. But housekeeping, everyone is muted. I'll try to run through this as quick as we can here today, give you an insight of what's going on this past year, looking also forward to what you can expect to see. We'll try to see if we have time for questions at the end, but if we do not, we encourage you obviously to write us, to reach out to me directly, and have another conversation, all things cyber security. Right, so moving on into our agenda here. So in today's session, we're going to be looking at a little bit of an introduction of what happened in the past year. Also, a big player here, ransomware, of course. What was the impact of that, discussing those things and how that's going to influence the next year as well. Looking also at different types of scams, cyber scams and phishing, what that meant to the industry in particular. Then also about remote work and how that continues to impact our lives and how we work and how we do business. And the big question, if it is safe yet, or probably will it ever be safe? We'll take a look a little bit about that. And then probably we'll gaze into our crystal ball and looking at trends and predictions for 2022, which is just now a few weeks away here. Right, so let's look back at the year. I mean, my goodness, it was, I think if you look at it from a CISO's point of view, this past year was not a good year at all. It very much started with already a lot of the pain points from the previous year in particular. I have to say that generally in security, we're always in a lot of pain, but it seemed to be very much a repeat, very much of last year, of that before, of 2020. And we immediately hit the year for a scramble to try and see what was going on with the SolarWinds cyber attack. And we're ending this year with record highs in terms of the ransomware attack sums. So really, CISOs have had a really difficult time in trying to balance and juggle all kinds of challenges, from looking at the hybrid workforce, looking at the continued security issues caused by all the things connected with the pandemic and COVID-19. We have a continued shortage still of valued and skilled cyber IT talent. We've had attacks on critical infrastructure as well, and all the other things that are going on. So all the everyday issues that CISOs have to deal with. This has been really, really tough, a tough year. Major attacks, of course, I'll go through those in a moment, and we'll have a look at these. So essentially what's happened here is that we've had these major attacks, and let's just break down a few of them here. I mean, just the choice here, I'm starting here with Kaseya because that was major one as well. So with Kaseya, obviously we had, this was around summertime. This affected thousands of companies. This is all to do with managed service providers, so MSPs, and their customers, which essentially became victims of a ransomware attack, which was carried out by the R-Evil group, causing massive amounts of disruption and downtime for thousands of companies. And this really put a big warning sign and pointed the finger at this kind of model, and looking at these supply chain attacks and how vulnerable we really are from all these different angles. And it's still, like, as someone connected with security for a while, it still is the same problem. And now with all the movement and mitigation to cloud and everything like this, our digital transformation is continuing apace at a really fast speed. But at the same time, we still have all these vulnerabilities and we're still not dealing with the basic problems, right? Then, of course, looking at something like Colonial Pipeline, I mean, that was something that, is a once in a decade breach. And these kind of things really occurred pretty much monthly. So we're suffering from that as well. But that one was a big game changer in terms of the whole industry. I mean, that stayed with us. That made many people, and particularly, obviously it happened on U.S. soil, but affected millions, and really, which often for cybersecurity is something that is quite distant to people. They can't really feel it in a tangible way. But this really went right to something that many Americans could understand, which is obviously we had fuel shortages, we had fuel issues at the pump, which were recovered obviously, but still, like, people felt that, and they knew that suddenly something like a cyber attack can very much be felt directly in your everyday life. So with that as well, another major one that I want to bring up here is also what happened in Ireland. There was also a critical attack there with ransomware that affected the healthcare systems. So again, there was another direct correlation and pain point with a cyber attack, what people could feel and notice in their day-to-day lives, that this affects them. This affected their lives, which is something that made fear and everything quite tangible. And we're riding as well, unfortunately, still a wave of problems from 2020. If we're looking at how quickly all these organizations really very hastily put together other remote working technologies and policies, where it was all about, let's get everyone socially distanced. That was the top priority. But unfortunately, for many cases, cybersecurity was a distant afterthought. Okay, well, of course, shiny technologies and new types of gadgets and devices and all these things were rushed. But I think there's probably not many people who weren't affected by this whole idea of Zoom and using all these types of, is it Microsoft Teams or any kind of video conferencing, those hiccups that we've all felt that started in 2020, but then really continued. And they really, unfortunately, exploited much more throughout this past year, the 2021. And the year is still not up. And we'll probably see, even by this recording, by the time we hit the end of this year, we'll probably see, you can quote me on this, some major new attacks somewhere. So don't be surprised. So the attack surfaces have really been rushed, and the attack surfaces have increased by the amount of all this implementation. Remote working, digital transformation, I said, began very, very quickly. And no one had ever really assumed that this would go so fast. I mean, everyone thought we had time and all these transition periods in terms of infrastructure, digital infrastructure, as well what people and how people work, that we had time to implement all this on a global scale. But as we've seen with the pandemic, it was a very different story. So just to go on this list as well, we had this Verkada attack, and I've also put that down here because that was significant in terms of like what kind of things happened there in terms of video that was actually collected. So there was a breach that exposed like live feeds of hundreds of thousands of surveillance cameras. And this wasn't just at a typical office. These were located in very sensitive areas. And we're talking about hospitals, we're talking about inside schools. So again, it showed another point, which I'll jump to, is all these connected devices, IoT, and all these things. It just continues to be a vulnerability that you just will see more and more of these vulnerabilities, more and more exploitations. And there's still no major unified way of addressing this. So that was also one of the major breaches. Then what I put on here is the Washington, D.C. police breach as well. And why? Perhaps not in terms of massive scale, but maybe in terms of what it means. So the actual significance of it is that there were highly sensitive lists of serving police officers, a lot of personal details that were breached and made available. So again, we're transferring now, again, more and more, and we may hear all the time this marketing stuff and buzzwords, digital transformation. What is that? What is that? Well, we'll just continue seeing more of this. of our data, of our personal data, everything being transferred in a digital format, no matter where you go, no matter which industry you're talking about. And it's happening very, very quickly, perhaps too quickly. But it does not mean that, and it's always hackers' fault. It's not always the case, but in many, many, many cases, it is human error. It is vulnerabilities that are exploited, but not necessarily. And one thing that I often say is that with all of this, cybersecurity is not just a solution that you can buy that solves all your problems. It's not just a box ticking exercise. Cybersecurity is a mindset from the top down and from the bottom up. This involves now every worker. This involves every type of person on the board. This involves every industry at every age. Everyone must continue to be vigilant, must know the basics of cybersecurity. It doesn't matter how many IT staff you will hire and how many great solutions there are. If your weakest link is always that person or a group of persons that don't understand the basics of cyber hygiene, that's an old topic by itself. But these are some major key point attacks that I wanted to share with here. Also, what I add here on another list is I'd go with T-Mobile as well. And T-Mobile is on this list because I think it was this year, and I think it was the fifth breach that T-Mobile had gone into and has suffered through basically in the last few years. So, there you can see a massive organization, again, exploited, very much on their own sort of lack of real resilience or maybe learning things. And that really damaged, I think, their reputation. And that's another thing we have to continue to think about, that once an organization is breached or a company is breached or a brand is breached, it's hard to come back from that. Major companies have a lot of money for downtime, and this can be very expensive. But at the same time, that reputational damage, that's something really, really hard to come back from. And I think that many organizations and many people are beginning to realize what that means. Obviously, ransomware, that was the really big one. I'll move as one of our main topics here. It's going to be sort of not just a review, but will also be very much there in terms of what's going to be there for next year. So with ransomware, an absolutely massive one, isn't going anywhere. Several reports out there with really dire statistics. Looks like one I found recently with, I think there's about 500 million attempted ransomware attacks that have happened. I think this was going into this year around the end of September, beginning of October. Probably by the time we get to the very end of this year, that will have gone up to about 800 million or something like that. So just imagine the scale of this. Some are not reported. The major ones that we read in the papers and media, of course, they're there, but there are many that are unreported, either because people and organizations just choose to pay the ransom right away. But these are happening countless times. And the sums are astronomical. One of the real sufferers of all this, one of the victims, is obviously healthcare, which is also immensely dangerous. And also looking at the banking industry, and just to give you a little perspective, that alone has kind of seen a ransomware increase by more than over 1,000% in this past year. So we're looking at financial institutions and banking, that amounts for round about, I think, $600 million for the first half of the year. And that's according to a report by the US Department of the Treasury. So we're looking at another high marker for this year, surpassing that of 2020. And very likely going into 2022, we'll see that number scale up again. We'll see that number increase, further loss, further exploitation. What will be interesting to observe, though, is more and more of this, this ransom is held through cryptocurrencies. So then the question is, if there is more coordination on a government level, if there's more coordination from various government agencies, if the world cooperates and these criminal gangs, which also have evolved very much into literal companies. These are ransomware as a service companies, basically. Now, if they're always looking for a payout, in cryptocurrencies, and we're able to kind of make their job harder. It'll be interesting to see how that affects their evolution. I'm not going to say that that's a good thing, obviously, but this is serious money, and these people are after some serious gains. So expect to see really more of this. I won't say more of the same, but for sure this tops the list in many ways in terms of damage. Some of the sectors that were really impacted this past year, I put government at the top. One of the reports, financial services, health services, education, but government, financial, and health really at the top of suffering the most, and very likely still into next year. That's not a quick fix. And unfortunately, the political response is always very loud, but then the actual movements and the actual things that will happen to try and mitigate and fix these problems take time. So government is certainly has done a lot this year, especially with the Biden administration reacting to Colonial Pipeline and solar winds and that executive order, and really mandating and enshrining a lot of new types of policy. I'm mainly thinking of zero trust and in a level which has been unprecedented, and that's good to see. But we'll still have to wait in terms of how that plays out for the next few months into the next year. That's going to have such an effective impact here. Right. So moving on also into remote work. Does it work? It certainly does, but it, as I said earlier, with all this rush to switching over, which happened very quickly last year, we had a lot of problems, and we continue to see those problems. But at the same time, more and more companies are continuing to be remote, and we'll see more hybrid environments. We'll see issues with bringing your own devices, but we'll continue to see issues with security problems as people are connecting. And as we reported throughout the year as well, we still have a lot of vulnerabilities through VPNs. VPNs are not really enough to cover all your security needs. Great first step, but on such a large scale with so many different people connecting to different assets does not guarantee security. The trend is here to stay, I think. We'll see really this massive shift of how we work. And that is also thanks to, I want to point to a good thing here, is that we live in a time and age where the technology enables us really to continue working, to continue going to our schools, to educate our children, to connect with friends and family, to do business. Many of us may not like it, and many have adapted to it, but I think in some way, shape, or form, we will always now have hybrid remote work available to many of us. And that brings within it some serious challenges, as we've seen. Great vulnerabilities in terms of securing endpoints, and many types of companies trying to address this, many types of solutions, and claiming that if I'm using something like AWS or different cloud providers, that's enough for my security. And of course, I think it just happened a couple of days ago. We have seen a serious problem with what's happened at AWS. Shutdowns, and of course, reliance on the cloud. If we have such a concentration of companies with cloud, then we see problems arise there as well. So it will always be a risk, but I think that a lot will be able to be done if the basics of cyber resilience are adhered to. And that, unfortunately, I have to say, is not always the most exciting stuff. But if we can do the basics well, right, that's about how we behave online. That's how we behave with our data. And that, as I said again, to my earlier point, it's about the weakest link of that. Who is the weakest link in the chain? Making sure that employees and staff are trained, that processes are followed, that everyone is aware of how they're dealing with data, with their digital data, identities, processes. This reminds me of also insider threats as well. And I always want to make the case that an insider threat is also an inside opportunity, and I mean the opportunity as in to work better. It shouldn't always be about vilifying the people that you work with, and that suspicion is on the highest level. It's also about working cooperatively that benefits the company. And we have to think more of and really realigning our minds from top board level, managerial level, down below, how we work with freelancers, contractors, on all different directions. This has to be rethought, and that will just continue into next year of cyber resilience culture. That's going to stay. That's one of the things for next year. So looking also at different types of trends and predictions here. So I'd start also with the supply chain. We've had loads of these attacks. We had the reports here, like a stunning 97% of companies have been impacted by cybersecurity breaches in their supply chain, right? And I'm thinking straight away with what I mentioned earlier with Kaseya, and basically because of that, on the same report, basically said that 93% admitted that they've suffered a direct cybersecurity breach because of weaknesses in their supply chain. So again, this will be heavily scrutinized. It already is, but it will be continued to be scrutinized a lot more going forward into the next year, because this just is one of those Achilles heels. We've seen that a lot of things have been rushed. We need to make sure the supply chain is secure. We need to make sure that we're doing everything we can, because it is still very much something that is an absolute must if we want to move into better security into the future. Because we still have third parties, and you may have good policies at your company. You may very well have great staff, but if you're using a third party that is not adhering to those same principles, that is maybe being negligent in how they deal with your data, then you're going to have this problem. So this is top of the list for sure. What I call here the great reverberation, reverberate the same things as last year. Many of the same problems, many of the same issues, but it will just be perhaps louder. I think we'll have more attacks. There will be more types of vulnerabilities, of course, new technologies. Everyone's racing to get new things out, and the basics will still not be covered. So we're talking about patching, talking about passwords. We're talking about all kinds of basics that are still not being done and followed. IoT, of course, a major one, looking at all kinds of integrations, millions of devices in our lives, which created an IoT cybersecurity challenge for people, for businesses and governments. I mean, we're going to have something ridiculous, like 55.5 billion connected devices by 2025. And the majority of those will be connected to the Internet of Things. That's just the way that we're going. And this will just absolutely generate stunning amounts of data. I mean, we're looking at something like, 73, 75, 80 zettabytes of data in the next few years. So, this proliferation of these devices that, they transmit and process all these different things that are so vital to us. They're just the perfect target. And this, I'm thinking of in every sector, not just in industrial, cyber, physical systems, in manufacturing, which is another major case, because in many of these instances in manufacturing and industry with OT and IT, we're using old legacy systems that are not really constructed to really fathom this concept of these millions and billions of devices at speeds and processing of data that's just astronomical, just wasn't conceived of a few years ago. So this hunger for proliferation of devices into our homes, if we're looking at fridges, if we're looking at lights, if we're looking at the workplace, if we're looking at different sensors, if we're looking at manufacturing. So this is going to be a major point here. I'm not sure it will get better next year. I'll be a little bit, let's say, not pessimistic, but maybe more realistic. There's some great work being done on government level in Europe, in the United States, in different countries, to try and put in different types of, let's say, frameworks that companies will be bound by that are making these devices, to really put security in there from the start. Because the best way in security is if you build it in right at the beginning. That's the best way, not as an afterthought or some kind of patch or something we'll forget about. Once it's out there, it's out there. So and there's a lot of great work being done by different alliances to try and set up certain frameworks for safety, higher safety margins, higher safety standards in the construction and design of many IoT devices. Okay. So, and cyber insurance, another big one. We've really seen that change a lot. I mean, the role of how cyber insurance has really been highlighted over this past year because of these massive ransomware attacks, and demand on this whole industry is massive. So a lot of this kind of coverage has been bad and negative and controversial. And many thinking that, these kind of some people believing that insurance payouts to victim organizations are actually, fueling the attacks themselves. Nevertheless, it's very much about, a very dangerous landscape here, threat landscape. And it just made cyber insurance all the more important and, really part of a wider process of making sure that, organization is cyber resilient if we're looking towards the future. So, how this will play out in the next year, given premiums and given how so many organizations are suffering from ransomware attacks, I think one area that needs to really address, which I'd like to see more of, obviously a major company and corporation, they can afford this kind of cyber insurance, but I'm looking at SMBs, which are very vulnerable, and we're looking at probably less than about 12%, this is from about a year ago, of SMBs, small and medium-sized businesses, actually have cyber insurance. So it's a massive number that is left out and exposed to quite serious, attacks. So that's another report by Global Data from last year, I believe. So there's quite a large section of these companies, and it's not just now for insurance. SMBs and small companies continue to suffer disproportionately in terms of anything. If they get attacked, if there's a breach, there's no bounce back. It's very hard. It's almost impossible. And many of them go under completely. It's a different story, as I said, with T-Mobile. They were attacked 4 or 5 times. There's enough money there to bounce back. Of course, disruption takes time. Disruption impacts business processes. Reputation is damaged. But small and medium-sized enterprises don't have that luxury. So I'm hoping that we'll see the entire industry here kind of be more aware of this problem. But I think also with cyber insurance, I'd say that part of it's sort of an issue that has 2 sides, positive and negative. I mean, one thing, yeah, it's great. It's part of the greater policy to protect vital data and organization. However, some might see it and become complacent. Hey, we have cyber insurance. Why do we need to bother with anything else? So this is the kind of double-edged sword problem where you find that, okay, if I have this, it gives a false sense of security. So we have to be careful about that. AI and cybercrime. I mean, clearly we'll see AI, play a major role, both on the side of fighting and helping against cybercrime, as well as fighting, in a negative way against. So it'll be used by obviously threat actors and hackers, as well as the good guys, and to help mitigate attacks. So we'll see AI really come in and step in to help out security teams and security professionals. I mean, really overloaded teams. We already have a shortfall of security professionals, a few million last time I checked, I think 3 or 4 million in the world. So a lot of the DevOps and the DevSecOps really looking at using more speed and value and security, and using AI in that process. So what's important here is to find and not necessarily, okay, something new will come along with AI that will blow us out of the water. It's more about addressing certain issues, enabling teams to work better. It's going to manage more data. It's going to make sure that in terms of context that AI will really add an intelligence, pardon the pun, to automation. And that's going to be really crucial, in particular when I'm thinking of ransomware. So it's about being resilient. It's about using data quickly, analyzing things, looking at the metadata, using, timing is everything, right? And it's the same with a cyber attack. So really about being ready to implement, ready to step in and catch inconsistencies and misuse as fast as possible. I think AI will really help a lot more in the coming year. On the flip side, it also affects, I think, one of the main areas which we really have to watch out for, which is with scams and phishing. Those kind of things will increase. They'll become more sophisticated. The kind of resources at the disposal of these criminals is massive. We'll just see more of this. Unfortunately, we're looking at some stats. Phishing was one of the most common types of cybercrime in 2020. It was very much the same for 2021. They've doubled in frequency. And basically, this is one of the main things, if I'm referencing, for instance, the Verizon data breach report from this past year. Phishing is like the top action, variety that's seen in breaches in the last year. That goes in well over 45% in their data. So clearly, as I said, the sophistication will increase because the types of attacks and the means at their disposal will also increase. So this kind of ties into the next one where I said AI will be on the other side of that. So AI and machine learning will really make scam attempts much more believable. And I'm thinking very much about deepfake technology. I mean, this was, I think, maybe a couple of years ago, where you had scammers that took the voice of a CEO using AI during that phone call, and they basically convinced a staff member, I think it was a manager executive at that company, to send them about something like $300,000 into a scam account, and it worked and that was, I think, about a year and a half ago. So this kind of technology, these deep fakes, and we've all seen it, different types of, social media, whatever, these things will just increase and get more sophisticated and give fraudsters, really new types of tools to impersonate voice, faces, maybe both, to really squeeze and fool more of us and really build on these social engineering attacks. So unfortunately, this is something that's going to be used by criminals. It's going to be used by scammers, but also on the flip side, it can be used in a positive way. I hope that we'll be able to counter some of this on the good side as well. But we still have to watch out. Phishing is huge. These deep fakes will still be a problem for next year. The dark cloud. I call it the dark cloud because I've already mentioned a little bit earlier, we've had now this problem with AWS. Many conversations with people who think that, because I'm using AWS or I'm using some sort of cloud provider for all my data, I've got Google Suite, whatever, that's it for my security. That's all I have to do. I don't have to do anything else. That is the biggest mistake you can make. Never be complacent in security. I said before, security is a state of mind. So we have to be vigilant at all times. Not one thing is enough. Of course, you can never guarantee complete security, but having someone say to me, like, what's your security policy? Oh, right. Well, Amazon takes care of that for us. That is not the mindset I'm talking about. So, and now with everyone running to cloud mitigation, more and more going towards AWS, more and more going towards Google, these massive, massive things, going to Azure, going to Microsoft. The big tech players will continue to have more and more of our data and will be more and more not necessarily liable, but if something does happen to these providers, things just are done. Do you have a backup? I don't know. Where is the backup? Who knows? So that's what I call the dark cloud. It's all very exciting. Everyone wants to, and obviously there's great benefits of that, but we have to also be aware that there are limitations. As we all rush to cloud, we have to make sure that we bring with it sensible security practices, sensible concepts which we can then ensure that our data that's then transferred that we're using is as safe, and we mitigate the kind of attack vectors as much as we can. And as I said already, ransomware, major problem for next year. I already covered that. And the next one that I want to talk a little bit about is also with zero trust. So this has come about very much due to what happened in the beginning of the year when we're looking at Colonial Pipeline. And zero trust in this model of segmentation, basically segmenting access. The idea of once you're in a firewall, when you log in, or think of the image of a wall, of a castle, you're inside, you can be trusted. So this concept is basically no good anymore. So even if you log in, you're in the perimeter, you are still not trusted. You're given only what you need for a limited time. So in a nutshell, it's about giving the most least amount of access, least privilege to someone for the least amount of time. In case something goes wrong, that person can not move around and do a bunch of crazy stuff and do any lateral movement. There was even a funny story, maybe not so funny, but where a group actually got in through a casino via an IoT device, I think going through looking at the fish tank, and then moving laterally to do more damage elsewhere. So zero trust rapidly has come back to the fore. It's a few years back that this came through as from the security community, to Forrester, I believe, and it's now again seeing a renaissance and now enshrined very much through Biden's executive order. And it's become more and more the buzzword of the day, but very much become enshrined and very important for any organization, especially if we're looking at hybrid working models in organizations. So we're going to see more of this, and it's zero trust strategy and models. It's not a solution by itself, not a product. There are various steps that create a zero trust environment. It's some people call it a philosophy, some people refer to it as a framework. But just be aware that there are many different layers to this. But the basic concept is to make sure that you're isolating access as much as possible. We have a lot of buzz on this, and this is going to be more and more important. Basically, if we have this hybrid workforce, we'll need to adopt things like multi-factor authentication more, and zero trust fits with that. So we'll see more companies really take this on even more. But again, it has to be something that has to be taken on by all rungs and all people in a company or organization. It doesn't matter if that's now at the top level and the highest board will talk about it. It needs to be implemented. So those people working will need to use it, okay? So we obviously are looking forward to this, and this is going to be one of those main things. So I want to leave with the adage of verify everything, trust nothing, but verify everything that you're doing. So I think 2022 will be, and without much fanfare, the year of zero trust in a way. If I were to put my hopes into that, that's something very, very useful and powerful. There are plenty more of these issues and many more predictions and trends, and let's call them areas that can develop, and I could cover here today. But I know that we're coming close here. I've already gone over our time limit, actually. So I hope that's given you a bit of insight into what is coming for next year. This is also key to understanding where we've come from this past year. We stand still in 2021. So mark my words, the year is not over. So I'm sure we'll still see highlights and unfortunately some incidences as well. But it's key also, for CISOs and really any upper level managers and any stakeholders connected to any organization, business, to be aware of these kinds of movements. And many of you will be watching this, will think, okay, some of these things you've already considered, but remember that's one thing that's really, really key to get everyone on board with this, so that security and cybersecurity is not just a solution, it is a mindset. So with that, I thank you very much for your attendance, and I hope you have a great day wherever you are in the world. Thanks so much, and any questions, reach out to us here at Fudo Security. Take care.